Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Development Control. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Why is my... Shut up. Thank you. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note the meeting is being webcast live on the internet. Please switch off your mobile phones or turn them to silent. For the benefit of members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everybody is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I'm chairman of this committee. To my right are councillors who will be making decisions on the application on this evening's agenda. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications, providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and keep to the points made to the application to material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning application to a maximum of 4 minutes. This evening there are 6 items on the agenda, so we should be able to do it within 2 to 3 hours. On that, we will be doing item 1, followed by item 6, and then 3, 4 and 5, because item 1 and item 6, whilst they came in that order, they are inextricably linked, and it will be easier if everything's fresh in our minds. So, apologies for absence. We have Councillor Leakes, Councillor Tomlin, Councillor Hussey and Councillor Howard Sorrell. I think the vast majority of them have got COVID. So, declarations of interest. Anybody? No declarations of interest. Urgent matters, I have none. Anybody else? No. Minutes of the meetings held on the 9th of March and the 15th of March 2022. I move them as being correct. Could I have a seconder? Councillor Goderson, thank you. I will sign those at the end of the meeting. Right, applications. Right, item 1, Fairy Meadows, 14 Hackwood Lane, Cliddesden. And Patricia, if you could introduce it.
This is an application for the change of use to residential garden land as an extension to the garden associated with number 14 Hackwood Lane, Cliddesden. It's a retrospective application. The recommendation is for approval, and there is an update. The first point is to clarify the planning history, that the PIP application was adjacent to this site. This site was not part of the PIP application. The second part of the update is there's supplementary information received from the applicant. There's an additional public observation been received. There was an objection. There's some more assessment in relation to policy EM5. And the final is a suggested additional condition to remove permitted development rights to create a vehicular or pedestrian access onto the Hackwood Road.
Thank you. If we could have Brian Carley, Sophie Pashley and David Raggett to the speakers' chairs, which are the 3 there with the names in front of them. This one's over there.
My name is Brian Carley. Sophie Pashley and David Raggett have actually agreed for me to speak on behalf of all 3 people.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you very much. You have 4 minutes And I will warn you when you've got 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is on the deck in front of you.
Is that working?
That's working.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Carley. I live at 13 Hackwood Lane. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I have the following objections. Number one, a negative impact on landscape, views, visual amenity and rural character. This conflicts with EM1, EM10, Design and Sustainability SPD, and the MPPF Section 12, Achieving Well-Designed Spaces. The garden conversion has already changed the open rural character by enclosing the area with tall fencing, non-native hedging, and it's introduced urbanising features, including this tall fencing, which has been lined with plastic netting, swings, tall zip wire structures 5 metres high, and a 2-storey building with a viewing platform. Local people have been very upset by the urbanising effect and have commented that the structure resembles a prison camp watchtower. We feel watched. In February, point 2, in February, the Planning Inspectorate dismissed the appeal for development on the adjacent part of the agricultural field. The inspector wrote, "The landscape hereabouts is pleasant rolling countryside. The appeal site is an undeveloped field significant size, with its roadside hedging makes an important contribution to defining the characteristics of Hackwood Lane. Development would remove this important gap in the developed frontage and essentially consolidate the ribbon of urban development in the countryside. In my judgment, this would be harmful to the rural character of the locality, be in conflict with local plan EM1 which seeks to avoid such harm." The inspector's comments could also easily apply to this application. The inspector also made a point of disagreeing with the case officer's recommendation, which had been to approve that application. Point 3. BDBC has refused permission for a similar change of use at Fox Lane, North Waltham. And I quote, "The proposal would introduce additional residential use and paraphernalia within the countryside and would result in the loss of an important gap between residential development, which would harm the rural character and scenic quality of the landscape." And quote, "Change of use would erode the intrinsic rural character of this section of the countryside and generate an urbanising effect. This proposal is contrary to EM1 and EM10. The Fox Lane comments could equally apply to this site. 4. Negative impact on biodiversity, green infrastructure, wildlife corridor, contravenes EM1, EM4, EM5, landscape biodiversity and trees SPD, and green infrastructure strategy and NPPF paragraph 174. The parish council objected and wrote, "This site is part of a corridor of fields off Hackwood Lane which contribute to important ecological network of fields, trees and hedgerows, including ancient woodlands north and south of Hackwood Lane. This corridor or rural gap will be permanently diminished should this application site be converted to domestic use. And change of use would also allow the protected hedgerow along Hackwood Lane to be legally removed because it would be no longer a protected hedgerow."
You have 1 minute.
Point 5, the proposed development is in the countryside, distant from an SPB. It does not represent sustainable development, contrary to SD1, SS6, NPPF paragraphs 838, 78 and 126. 6, if approved, the site becomes previously developed land with the risk of future housing development in the countryside. 7, it would set a dangerous precedent for garden grabbing and annexation of agricultural land in the countryside. 8, the garden at number 14 has already been extended into the field in the past without planning permission. No further urbanisation of this important gap should be permitted. 9, the negative impact on privacy of neighbouring properties and garden, contrary to EM10, Design and Sustainability SPD and MPPF Section 12, Achieving Well-Designed Spaces. We've lost the privacy to an habitable room and to our garden. Neighbours have also lost privacy to their property. We feel like we're being watched.
Could I ask you to wind up now, please?
I ask you to reject this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you just turn your microphone off for a moment, please? Try again. No, try the other button. That's the one. Thank you. Questions to the speaker? No? Thank you. If you return to your other seat, and could we have Councillor Raphael, please? Good evening, Councillor Raphael. You have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Chairman, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to address the meeting. You're somewhat depleted tonight. I've spent the day addressing one person of great eminence, so it's nice to address 7, I think it is. I oppose this application, but I wonder if we can... Yes, that's it. Right. So the left-hand square is where this was last before this committee. And the officer said, yep, approve it. Residents said nay. The landscape officer said nay. And you refused it. So the applicant went before the planning inspector, who also said nay, and criticised the officers for recommending approval. So we now have the red block, the officers recommending approval, the local residents saying nay, the landscape officer saying nay, and I'm urging you to say nay again tonight. That really is it. And you've had the reasons from Mr. Carley eloquently put, that the issue and the harm to the landscape and the rural character. For those of you who don't know Hackwood Lane or just need a little reminder, Hackwood Lane is almost a bit like if you were to describe houses as ... In other words, they're just stopping as it becomes more remote into the countryside. And the concept here, of course, is the applicant wants, without a doubt, to build houses, because that's what they wanted to do on the blue block with the PIP, and that's what they'll want to do with an enlarged garden, undoubtedly in due course, if they ever sell. And so that is why it harms the landscape, because of course these through views of these being remote housing in the countryside, which eventually tails off with no more housing at all. And the landscape officer appreciates that, and you know that that's been tested in front of a planning inspector, who was critical of our officers for not respecting that. And interestingly, it's been tested elsewhere in Cliddeston previously when there was an application for 40 homes on the Farley Road. And the officers on that occasion did refuse it, I think under delegated powers, based on landscape grounds which were upheld. And it's interesting, of course, that despite not having a 5-year land supply, the inspector made abundantly clear that landscape grounds should be given significant weight. Which is, hurrah, we like that, and we should welcome it, because that's actually applying our policies as they're meant to be, not trying to ignore them, and for what, expediency? Because it just makes this a little easier? Well, I'd urge you to refuse this. I don't think I can say much more. I'll obviously answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Raphael? No? Thank you. If you could have a quick wipe down with the things provided, that would be useful. Questions to officers? In that case, debate. I don't know the answer to that one, sorry. I see no hands up for debate. Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we've got the previous application that was rejected. The previous application that was kicked out at appeal, as has been eloquently said. We also have the issue of the landscape officer's objections to this particular proposal. I guess the question is, you can only judge what is in front of you at this moment in time, and that's the difficulty that we've got. This isn't a proposal for a dwelling. This is not a proposal for a residential building. This is a proposal for the garden and the context in which it's set. So that's what we've got to weigh up, and that's the problem for us. I completely agree that I would suspect that the landowner will come back with a proposal for development on the land and seek to get the other houses through other means. That isn't what's in front of us. That's the problem. So putting that cynicism to one side, the absolute truth to one side of what's going to happen, because it isn't cynicism, it's the absolute truth of what this developer's going to do, I would imagine that we've got to judge it on the grounds of whether or not the landscape impact is actually of such harm that the approval of this would do damage to those views and the integrity of, exactly as Councillor Raphael says, the nature of Hackwood Lane. And at the moment, I'm coming down on the grounds that I think it probably would. And I think the landscape arguments are pretty serious. But I'd like to hear what colleagues have got to say, and actually whether or not you agree.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Freeman. Thank you.
I have to say, I agree with Councillor Harvey. I mean, it does look like that they probably will want to build houses on it at some point, but we can't do that. We've had applications here before, and we've had to approve them because we can't judge what's here by what we suspect might happen. So on those grounds, we have to look at landscape grounds. And I happen to agree that it probably would impact it. And looking at some of the pictures in the garden there, it certainly seems to be one of the building was the next application, wasn't it? Excuse me, getting ahead of myself. Yeah, no, I agree with Councillor Harvey on this one.
Councillor Falconer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Reading through the reports that we've had, obviously this has got quite a checkered history, but being a member of a rural ward, I have a severe problem with the usurping of agricultural land for residential use, and the times in which we live. I think we need all the agricultural land we can get. When I read through the officer's approval, I tended to take the exact opposite view to the interpretation of what they saw. So, in terms of change of use from agriculture to residential, I'm afraid I can't support that proposal.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Godison.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, to be honest, this is a bit of a tricky one, really, and it's quite easy to make a reasonable case, both for and a reasonable case against. I'm inclined to agree with the last speaker. I personally would prefer if it was refused, but I think I would have to leave that to the committee to decide whether they thought there was a reasonable case to refuse it. All I would say is, if it does end up being permitted, I would hope, as suggested in the paper, that we're able to insist that no development rights would apply on this particular section. Thank you.
Thank you. Personally, I don't like it. I agree with pretty well everything that's been said. The house has already got quite a substantial garden. I don't see the need to remove agricultural land to extend that garden. And I agree with the landscape officer's reason for refusal. So on that basis, I move for refusal. Do I have a second? Seconded by Councillor Harvey. Those in favour of refusal for the reason of... Okay.
Yeah, and before you take that, and clearly this is a retrospective application, so if members were minded to refuse the application, you'd also need to consider the necessary steps required in terms of any rectification of that. I mean, clearly, I would suggest that if members were minded to refuse, then the steps taken would be to cease the use of the land.
Yeah.
In that residential way. So that needs to form part of that alongside. Yeah.
We'll also need a reason for refusal.
And also your reason for refusal, which I think, from what's been said. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Excuse me. So it's been moved for refusal on grounds of EM1, which I think was introducing urban paraphernalia into a rural setting, and recommended for enforcement to return it back to agricultural use. Those in favour of refusal? And enforcement. Thank you. That's it. Unanimous. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And thank you. If you could confirm.
I'll summarise that. The application is to be refused. My notes from the discussion is the intrinsic value of the countryside, the landscape impact, the can't read my own notes, urban paraphernalia, all based on EM1, and then the reason for that would be the reason for refusal and the reason for enforcement, and the steps to rectify on the enforcement would be to cease the use as of the land as residential and to revert back to its previous use, which was agricultural.
Right, we will now go straight to item 6, which is the same site again, and if we could have Mr. Carley as up to the Speaker's chair, if you can just sit whilst the officer introduces this one. Thank you.
This is a planning application on the same site as the application that has just been discussed. The application is retention of a domestic outbuilding. The application is retrospective. There is an update. Again, the explanation of the planning history in the PIP. Supplementary information was received, which was a letter from the applicants, additional letter of objection received, and there's a correction on page 143 of the main papers. Just to state that the decision that members have just taken is now a material consideration in the determination of this application.
Thank you, Mr. Carley. You have 4 minutes. Obviously, we've already heard what you said on the last one, but if there's anything you'd like to add, you have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. Okay, thank you. You have 4 minutes between you.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I would have said the same comment, so I won't go through them again. My overriding comment is, given that the site has now been rejected in terms of residential, my view is that it makes no sense to be putting forward a proposal for a residential building, so that should be rejected on all the same grounds that I've already mentioned in the previous 4 minutes. So that's all I have to say, nothing more.
Oh, thank you very much, Brian. Good evening, committee. Just to address a couple of things. This is a garden outbuilding which has got a first floor deck. I don't think many of us have seen one with 17 square metres of first floor deck on it as a garden outbuilding. It's quite considerable. It's parked right up next to our fence line, and although it's described as farmland behind it, it's actually equestrian use land. It's where we care for our horses and train them. And we also train our dog there in search and rescue and agility. And this tower, because it is a tower at the end of the day, it used to have a roof on it. It was taken off when this process started because it stood out like a sore thumb. But when you're up on that, you can see virtually everything that we do in our fields. So as a level of intrusion to our own privacy, it's considerable. My partner couldn't attend tonight because she's so distraught by the fact that this has been allowed to sit up there, and there have been people as neighbours to go up there and to just look down on what's been happening in our fields all the time. She couldn't bring herself to come tonight, but I thought it was only right that I came and addressed that matter. It's not fair, it's not reasonable on us at all, and I would urge you to refuse it and to see that it's taken down. Thank you, that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. If you could turn your microphone off, please.
Yes.
Questions to the speakers? No. Thank you very much, gentlemen. If you could have a quick wipe down of everything you've touched, the wipes are there. I forgot the first time you were there. Questions to officers? Yeah. Councillor Gaskell.
Sorry, Councillor Raffel.
Sorry, my mistake. Councillor Raffel. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Chairman, thank you. What I would submit is that it is a totally inappropriate form of development in the open countryside, and therefore you should reject it.
Questions for Councillor Raffel? No. Thank you very much. Questions to officers? And I've already got Councillor Gaskell followed by Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. On page 148, we've got the drawings of this. Do they include the actual structure, which looks like an A-frame? Because they're not shown on here, and I just wondered why they're not shown on here.
Do you mean the other end of the zip wire? Sorry, I couldn't get the word out. The zip wire where it comes down. Yeah, it's on. It's in the photo. Go back. No, there. That structure there on the screen. That should be on the plans, and if it were to be approved, then that would be part of the development that would be approved. No, it's here. It's up here, so it's a zip wire that comes down. Yeah.
Is there something on the building as well?
There's a balustrade around the top of the building. That's the top of the zip wire that comes down, that you would jump down from.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Councillor Faulkner.
Excuse me. Can I just have clarification for the officers in terms of, we've just rejected a change of use on a previous application, so this is arable land. Where do we stand in terms of evaluating this application to have a structure on arable land in the countryside?
Given the previous decision on item 1, the members have rejected the planning application to approve the use as residential. So you are now considering this on after you've made that decision. So you've determined that residential is not acceptable. So you're considering play equipment on a piece of land that the members have resolved to be reverted back to agricultural. So the going back to its lawful use, which is agricultural, with a play equipment on agricultural land.
Any more questions for officers? No? In that case, debate. Councillor Goderson.
Thank you, Chair. I did take the opportunity this morning to go out and have a look at the site. I have to say it's a very, very dominant and, in my view, although that's not a planning issue, extremely unattractive. But what I would say is that it is certainly not an appropriate design and does not relate in a sympathetic manner to the street scene and character of the surrounding area. It certainly would have a significantly detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the surrounding area. And it does result, in my view, in an undue loss of privacy, particularly to number 13 and also to the land, behind the structure, and causes undue overlooking, overshadowing and overbearing, etc., etc. So on that basis, I would certainly wish to propose refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, did I see your hand up? No.
Happy to second the refusal. 2 points really. First of all, it's retrospective, which I find incredibly arrogant. Secondly, the position is that the actual applicant hasn't bothered to come along and speak to the committee this evening in any way to defend the application, or for that matter, to defend it being retrospective. It is clearly out of keeping, even for a residential garden. I mean, look at it in the context of the surrounding area. So even if we had passed the first, I think we still have problems with the second. That all being put to one side, we are dealing with a piece of land that is now countryside because we've said it's countryside. It is not in keeping with the countryside, and enforcement action should have to follow logically from any decision we make in refusal, because we're going to have to deal with it and deal with the fact as well that the land is not demarcated. It's clearly being used completely as a residential area attached to the property, and the applicant has had no regard to any of the issues that have been raised during this process either, from what I can see. So from that perspective, I think it's going to be a matter of enforcement, but I go with the refusal first and would second Councillor Goderson's proposal.
Thank you. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, if I could just make a few comments on what's just been mentioned there. Understand the comments in respect of the impact upon the character and appearance of the area, particularly in light of the decision, the resolution on the first item. Just a few points to pick up on. The first is in respect of the retrospective nature of the application. Applicants are entitled to make retrospective applications. It's at their own risk to do so, but they don't face any penalty in the planning system in terms of the assessment. As I said, it's at their own risk in terms of then any consequences, which in the case of item 1, for example, is enforcement action and not prejudging what the vote will be here. In terms of the applicant not appearing, they weren't able to, but they have provided comments which are provided within your update paper in lieu of them being able to attend. And just on the other comment in respect of the some of the discussion in respect of the overlooking and overshadowing, the distance between the structure and the nearest residential property is between 40 and 46 metres, which is quite significantly distant, particularly when we consider our own design and sustainability SPD, which talks about 20 metres back to back between residential properties. And I appreciate we're not in that kind of scenario, but that's double that length looking over the field that is also within the applicant's ownership. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Been moved and seconded for refusal and enforcement, I believe. Sorry, Councillor Gaskell.
Sorry, I just wanted to confirm, it's back to my original question about the structure. I've just seen a picture there and it does have a structure on there which isn't shown on the plans. And I just wanted to confirm that this proposal to make it more agricultural includes all the structures there, all the plastic fencing, all the fencing that's there, and anything that's urbanising that area.
Just to say, the planning application is refused on what's been applied for. The resolution to take enforcement action would relate to the use of the land and then any operational development that supported that use or wasn't agricultural, such as the slide isn't agricultural, the zip wire isn't agricultural, but there might be a patio on there that's encroached from the residential land. So the reason to refuse the planning permission is quite specific to the planning application and the planning application plans. The delegation to give officers the ability to take enforcement action to cease the use and to remove anything that's residential means that when the enforcement officer goes to do a visit and have a final sort of mop-up and see what happens, it would be directed at perhaps more development that's in the planning application, because the planning application is just what's been applied for, not necessarily everything that's on the land, but the enforcement notice would be directed at everything that could be removed that was residential or required planning permission.
Right. Been moved for and seconded for refusal and enforcement action. Those in favour of refusal? Yeah, everyone again. Thank you. If you could confirm, please.
The application has been refused. From my notes, I would say that it's a reverse of reasons 1 and 2 for approval that Councillor Godison read out and said on page 136, all the reasons that have been said were acceptable or unacceptable. And then enforcement is again linked to the cessation of the use and removal of the paraphernalia that's residential and not agricultural.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to be clear, because obviously Greg came back in terms of relation of the potential overlooking of neighbouring properties, so I just want to be clear that members have taken that on board, but you are still minded to refuse on that basis, is that correct?
Yeah, well, I think votes were taken. So.
Can I just clarify, having said my comment earlier about the applicant, which I do stand by for most cases, as I understand it, they were at work and therefore they can't attend. Just for the accuracy of the record, I think I should put the record straight on that basis. Is that the case?
We don't know whether they were at work, but they were just unavailable to attend this evening.
That was their representation to us earlier. Okay. That's a different matter from basically not being bothered to turn up, which is...
Yeah, they took time to provide comments in lieu of being able to attend. So the comments in the update paper are that.
Thank you. Item number 2, 43 Kings Road, Basingstoke. And if somebody could introduce it, that would be good.
Thank you, Chair. The application is at 43 Kings Road. It's an application for a change of use from a hairdresser's to a pizza shop. There is no update paper on this application, Chair. Thank you.
If we could have Tyler Berry to the speakers table, chairs. Do we have a Tyler Berry? No. In that case, questions to officers, isn't it? Questions to officers? No? No questions to officers. Debate? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. it's a commercial use and a commercial shopping parade. I don't see any issue with the application. I think it's straightforward in the arguments that have been made by the officer's report, and I'd move approval as prepared the officer's report.
Thank you. I'm happy to second it. So it's been moved and seconded for approval as per the officer's report. Those in favour? Good, all of them. Thank you. If you could confirm.
Thank you, Chairman. To confirm that application is approved in accordance with the officer recommendation in the order paper.
Number 3, land north of Red Grain, Bradley, Hampshire. Patricia, if you could introduce it.
This is a planning application, full planning application, seeking permission to change the use of agricultural land for the exercising of dogs, erection of a field shelter and the installation of perimeter fencing, parking and a pathway. There is a small update which is to add an additional informative mentioning that the signage would require a separate permission if the permission were approved.
And if we could have Peter Degemark to the Speaker's chair. Good evening, Mr. Degemark. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is on the deck in front of you.
Yes, press like this, yeah? Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for letting me speak regarding the change of agricultural use of the proposed land, presently being grazed by the cows on Southwood Farm. My name is Peter Degemark and I live in Southwood House, the nearest residential property in Bradley to the proposed development. A number of residents, including myself, do not feel it is the right site to be used for dog walking and does not comply with policies EM10 and EM4 of the local plan. It would bring in people from outside the area, cause unwanted traffic congestion and not be used by the locals. Bradley Parish has a policy to decline comments on planning matters. I feel, however, as a resident living so close opposite the site, that my security, protective views and privacy will be overlooked and adversely affected. The development is therefore against policy EM10 in brackets 2B of the local plan. The proposed scheme should also be refused on the following additional grounds. The site is situated at the top of Canterbury Valley in an area of outstanding natural beauty. Any development can be seen from several points, not only from Red Lane, but also from Southwood Farm Lane going up from Bradley. It would clearly be an unacceptable breach of the open countryside, especially during the winter months when no screening from leaves are available. Furthermore, as the opening hours of the proposed scheme extend to 8 p.m., it is unrealistic to assume that no floodlighting might be required in winter. Will people walk their dogs with torchlights? 2. There are already several dog walking sites nearby with bigger areas to walk in. These are run by the Woodland and National Trust and are free to the public. Why pay £11 an hour when you can walk nearby for free? Unfortunately, the proposed site might attract aggressive and unruly dogs that owners dare not walk in public places for risk of attacking other dogs. The applicant has not provided any details from other similar sites regarding this, nor has he demonstrated that there is a local need for such sites in the land in question. 3. The council hasn't got any bond or security to fall back on to restore the area should the development fail. The land could then be put forward to the other uses, including residential. From what I understand, the applicant has a 10-year lease from Mansmer Estates, but no details have been provided. 4. There is a risk that the site may be used as a fly tip, being unmanned, and the council might have to pay to clean-ups. Furthermore, dog walkers not wanting to pay would simply climb over any fence and help themselves to walk around the defined pen in the ancient woodlands adjoining. 5. Most important, the biodiversity report submitted has not been based on the period long enough and should be for a year at least to discover other species worth protecting. Indeed, there are buzzard nests in the tree crowns adjoining the site which weren't mentioned in the report. Buzzard are protected species and risk being driven out by the kites. Their habitat and offspring should be protected. I have been watching their chicks learn to fly here for 30 years. The landowners has even provided breeding pens for them. A dog walking area will upset the nesting of these birds. Noise of barking dogs, flashing lights in the evenings, closing of car doors, raised voices, 7 days a week, etc.
You have 1 minute.
Officers have not commented on this, and the committee should reject the proposal as it does not comply with policy EN4 of the local plan and offers no overriding need for development. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman and committee members, the proposal has not been thought out properly, not warranting taking good agricultural land out of production, failing to address local needs and wildlife, and should be rejected. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I have copies of my notes and photos of the nests here for your information.
Thank you. Good. Thank you. Questions for Mr. Degemark? No, I have one. The land is at the moment agricultural. Can you tell us exactly what it's being used for at the moment, please?
Oh, I thought I mentioned that. It's actually used for grazing of cows.
I see no other hands up, so thank you very much. Looks like you're already doing the wipe down. Thank you. If you can return to your other seat, and if we could have Robert Brown, please. Evening, Mr. Brown. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Lovely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rob Brown. I run and operate a company called Paw Paddock Limited. We supply secure enclosed dog walking spaces for those that don't have the luxury of walking their dog in open countryside off a lead. That is for a number of reasons. Aggressive dogs obviously fills a part of that. Dogs with a chase instinct that are a nuisance on a part of other land within the countryside, which is well documented throughout this area particularly, and the high levels of livestock worrying that go on around here. I'm a farmer myself. The first paw paddock that we opened was opened 4 years ago and sits currently 40 metres away from the front door of my house. There is no complaints from me or the 7 other dog walking fields we have operating at present, all around the south coast in Hampshire and West Sussex, all of which have full planning permission, all of which are supported by the policies that are laid out by your district council as well as the National Planning Policy Network. The case officer has done a fantastic job of going through each policy bit by bit and explaining how we meet those criteria. We're a rural diversification, we're supporting a prosperous rural economy, and the site has been very specifically chosen to not have a detrimental effect on local amenity. There is over 100 metres from the edge of the site to the closest residential property. There is as you can see in the pictures, the field is surrounded on 3 sides by mature woodland, and all of the items that are to be placed on the land are commonplace within agricultural land. We are talking about a stock deer fence, a mobile field shelter, which is a horse field shelter bought from hunter stables, and a pathway. And beyond that, we're asking for dogs to be able to walk in the countryside. There is nothing within this application that stands as onerous or out of place within the countryside. It is very simply someone going and walking their dog. Furthermore, I'd like to add that within this application, the use is exclusive use. It is not groups. It is one person for one booking for 25 minutes or an hour with their maximum of 4 dogs. And there is a maximum of 2 cars per visit. We have a buffer period between sessions. Therefore, you will never have 2 people, or you will never have groups arriving at the same time as people are leaving, to allow people to leave and come from the site without being interacting with one another. This is such a vital part of rural diversification. It is something that farmers across the country are looking at doing. I'm an operator of that, but I'm also a farmer, knowing how vital this is for our, in the toughest times of agricultural history, for us to survive and make money outside of agriculture. This is encouraged by virtually every policy. I also would like to take note that every single consultation came back with no objection to our planning application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions for the Speaker? Councillor Freeman.
The previous speaker mentioned concerns about whether you'd be erecting floodlights and things like that for dog walking in the evenings. How can you respond to those?
So the planning application which we submitted, which also I'm sure be enforced upon, is that we only operate from 7 till 8, Monday to Saturday, 8 till 8, Sundays and bank holidays, or sunlight or sunset. There will be no artificial light. There will be no one walking in darkness. And that's applied to our other 7 sites that are in operation, as well as the other 6 sites that have planning permission that are going to be built this year.
Councillor Gaskell.
So I'm a little bit confused about that, because you say you're operating from 8 in the morning or 7 in the morning till 8 at night. It does get dark before then. Also on your website, there's it shows a number of structures like agility type training. Is that planned for that area? And also it shows a hard standing going around. Is that what you plan to do?
So regards the operation hours, all the bookings are done by us, and we lower and close up our operating hours to tie in with sunrise and sunset to ensure that no one is operating outside of that period. Regards to the hard standing, that makes up a part of the application. So that's made up of what's called Fittleworth stone, which is very light sandstone. It's usually quite favourable amongst councils, which is why we use it. It's a very soft stone that doesn't have any hard surfacing or sealing. So over a period of months, grass around it will grow up through it and basically give a hard area that people can walk their dogs without poaching and trashing the grass with too much footfall. In terms of the objects, no, they don't make up part of this application. That will be submitted at a later date if we see fit.
Councillor Falconer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a councillor for a rural ward, and one of the problems that we have is when dogs break free and savage sheep, etc., which can be quite unpleasant. How can you sort of guarantee that there won't be any escaped dogs or people who are there on their own might lose control and they run off, etc.?
So by definition, the business we're offering is to actually remove those people from rural areas where they could be a threat and putting them in a space that is secure and safe. So the field itself is made up of what's called tornado netting, 6 foot high stock fencing, slightly tighter squares than a normal stock fence, make sure no dog could ever get through it. The pathways are also established up next to that fence line. So even if a dog were to dig, it would have to dig through the solid path to make its way out. It is our entire business is about making sure dogs do not escape these areas. I also like to add a part of the plans, which are in the plans, is we have an airlock system. So cars drive into the first, I think it's 8 square metres of the field, shut the gates behind them, then they let their dogs out of the car, then they open the gates into the larger area of field.
Any more questions? No? Thank you very much. If you can have a wipe down everything you've touched, I'm sure. Questions to officers? Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just clarify the biodiversity point? Resident raised the issue of protected species potentially in the area around the site. Have we got the survey results and the information back to confirm there are no protected species that would be affected by the use of the site as proposed?
The application was submitted by an ecological mitigation and enhancement policy document that's on page 81, and the condition requires it to be complied with. The biodiversity team were consulted on that, and there are qualified ecologists, and they have no objection to the application, subject to that condition and external lighting being put on there, which is to comply with the mitigation proposed within that document, which partly is if you look at the plans, see that there's the 2 buffer areas between the woodland areas, so that there's to create a buffer between the use and the woodland, which is where more of the species go in. But yeah, so our biodiversity, who are our ecologists, have looked at it and they're happy with that document that's been submitted.
Councillor Gaskell.
When we assess these projects, do we take into consideration the market for this? Because I look where Bradley is and where the customer base is, probably from Alton or from Basingstoke, and it's a good few miles away. And I just wondered, you know, to walk a dog, you need to walk a dog every day. So are we expecting these people to be coming in a car and back doing a 10, 12 mile journey every day?
There is an expectation that dog walkers would use the car. It's not an unusual scenario for dog owners to do weekly, daily trips in their local areas and to do trips out If they were to do a trip every day, then it would be on the capacity of the site, whether there is that capacity. But yes, the report does just state that it is expected to be a car-based use, not because people who could walk to it would already have the benefit of being able to walk their dog in the open countryside. So yes, it has been considered that it is a rural location. It is expected that people will drive by car, but that people who are walking their dog, who wish to get their dog exercised in the countryside, would be likely to take their dog in their car to the countryside at any rate.
Okay, so I can have a supplementary question. I've just noticed as well, it's on a national cycle path. Do we consider that at all in this application?
Hampshire Highways have been consulted on the application and they've got no objections. So we would have to assume that they've considered that as part of their appraisal as the Highway Authority.
Any more questions? In that case, debate. Councillor Harvey.
I'm going to say on the basis of the debate, I can't see a reason for objection to it, so I was going to start the conversation on that too.
Please put your microphone on, please. Councillor Gaskell.
Yeah, so I have a number of issues. I mean, obviously, we've just had a previous application changing agricultural land use to residential. This is changing it to business. I don't see any benefit for the local community in this. There's going to be no profits. There's nobody working there. It is on a national cycle route on single lane traffic, which we're going to be encouraging more traffic. There is a dog walking place within 3 minutes drive from this, operated by, I'm not sure, I think it's National Trust or somebody of that type of ilk. It's an extremely quiet place, and at night it's, there's no light pollution in this area. I think if it does go into night time, I know we've been assured that it won't be, but there will be torches, there'll be headlights and stuff. So I've got quite a lot of issues with it. Whether we can use them to knock it back or not, I don't know.
Anyone else for debate? I'm in the same mind as Councillor Harvey, that I can't see a legitimate reason to refuse it. That it's not going to bring light into the area because we've been told that it will only be used in the daytime. And if lights were introduced, that would be a separate planning issue. And we have a presumption in favour of development, in which it is a form of development. So we would need to find a reason to refuse it. And I haven't got that. So on that basis, I move for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Freeman, thank you. So it's been moved and seconded for approval as per the officer recommendation. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I make that. And those against? 1. Thank you. Officer, could you confirm?
I can confirm that the application has been approved, subject to the conditions on the main paper and the additional informative on the update paper.
Item number 4, land north-east of Wildermere, Hallhurst Hill, Bulkhurst. Now, before we start on this, I think we all remember we visited this site a little while ago. It has got a PEP approved on it. So the principle of putting a dwelling on this piece of land has already been established. We cannot change that. What we are actually looking at tonight is whether the development, the building that is proposed is the right building in terms of scale, build type and location within the site. We are not looking about whether there should be a building here or not. To say that was already decided on the PEP. So if somebody could introduce it.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the erection of one detached dwelling with associated works at land to the northeast of Wildermere, Hallhurst Hill. There's a short update. and that provides clarification that the site is not within the North Essex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty. The assessment is merely in respect of that the proposal would not cause harm to AONB, and clarifies that the distance to AONB is approximately 2.5 kilometres to the south. There is also just a correction in terms of there's an erroneous reference to Browning Hill Green within the report that should be struck. Thank you, Chairman. Nothing further to add.
Thank you. And if we could have Mark Pettit. Thank you, Mr. Pettit. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee, my name is Mark Pettit, and I prepared and submitted this planning application on behalf of the applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Duplessis. The application is recommended for approval, and we fully support this recommendation. I'm not going to say too much about the application, as the committee report is both comprehensive and robust and sets out clearly why planning permission should be granted in this instance. Now, members may be familiar with the site, as permission in principle was granted at Development Control Committee for a single dwelling back in October 2020. So the principle of a new build house in this location has already been established, and nothing has changed in policy terms that would change the council's position in this respect. Indeed, whilst the site falls within the open countryside, the council accept that they still cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land, which means that those development plan policies that relate to housing delivery, such as SS6, are out of date. So following the grant of permission in principle, a subsequent technical details consent stage application was submitted to the council last year. It came to Development Control Committee with a recommendation for approval, but members had concerns with the bulk and massing of the proposed dwelling and the impact that this would have on the property immediately to the southwest, both in terms of being overbearing and overshadowing. Rather than pursuing the scheme as an appeal, the applicants have taken on board the concerns expressed by both members and local residents, and we have amended the scheme to address the previous reason for refusal. The house has been positioned further to the north, closer to the front building line of the adjoining property to the southwest. The rear projection is now only single storey, 2 metres or so lower than the previous scheme, and has been positioned further away from the neighbouring property. The depth of this element has also been reduced by over 2.5 metres, so that the rear elevation is broadly level with that of Shalom to the southwest. Cumulatively, these changes result in a much improved scheme from that which members considered last year, and we hope the members appreciate the efforts that we have made to overcome the previous issues. So in summary, the site remains an appropriate location for a single dwelling. The council can see that they cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land, a situation that could become worse with the existing nitrate issue in the borough. In this respect, the proposed development would make a small but worthwhile contribution to this situation on a site that is not within the AONB, a conservation area or a flood risk zone. Furthermore, as the proposed dwelling would not be isolated, the location wholly accords with the framework that seeks to promote sustainable development in rural areas by encouraging homes to be located where it will enhance or maintain the vitality of rural communities. In short, the proposals do not fall down against the presumption in favour of sustainable development, as the adverse impacts do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. We believe that the previous reason for refusal has been addressed with the notable changes that have been made to the design components of the scheme.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. And there are no technical reasons why this application should not be considered favourably. Indeed, there have been no objection from landscape, waste, environmental health, biodiversity or highways. We therefore respectfully request that planning permission be granted accordingly in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Pettit? No? Thank you very much. If you could have a wipe down. And if we could have Councillor Poland, please. Good evening, Councillor Poland. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I'm grateful for the opportunity of presenting to you again on this particular application, and also to the committee for flatly refusing the last application that was submitted on very principled grounds. I'm well aware, Chairman, that this is not a discussion on an agreement in principle, but committee members will be aware as to why a permission in principle is granted. There are 3 conditions: location of the site, the type of land used proposed, and the amount of development. Insofar as the latter, there is one property being proposed, so that's satisfactory. I would argue that the location of the site is certainly not suitable, and I will highlight the reasons why. The type of land is also, I would argue, not suitable. This is still agricultural land for which an application for change of use was flatly refused. We are now being asked to consider a proposal to build a property on it. When the committee visited the site, they made various recommendations and comments, and there are many reasons as to why I think this should not be granted, despite the marginal changes that has been made. But even those changes do not address the fundamental reasons, principally that the adjacent property Shalom will still be overlooked and overshadowed. The new build is still higher than Shalom. The committee certainly commented last time that the building should not be higher than Shalom, and yet it now is. It's now supposedly a 3-bedroom house. It's got a remarkably large laundry and storeroom, but there we go. In the officer's report, she says, and I quote, that the development would not result in an undue loss of privacy or cause undue overlooking, overshadowing, overbearing on noise. But on page 15 of her report, she actually contradicts that statement and says completely the opposite. There are many other reasons as to why I don't believe this proposal should go through. Mention has been made on a number of occasions of the safety of the road. This is a single track road that goes down to a nature reserve. It's rather ironic that only recently there was an accident on the hill. There is no turning part on the hill. The only turning part is actually opposite the proposed site entrance. Lorries generally reverse down Hawkhurst Hill. Not all of them, but the vast majority. Barely 2 weeks ago, there was an accident involving a vehicle with the lorry driver reversing down. Ironically, the owner of the vehicle that was involved in it was the applicant. So I make no more comment. Fortunately, she wasn't injured. That's the good thing. But it does highlight the difficulties of access. It is certainly not the case, indeed it's quite the opposite, that this is easy to get at. This is a blind bend, and I am frustrated that the Highways Authority have chosen to consider that this is an easy access point.
You have 1 minute.
This is a road that is used, is dead end, it's used by many walkers, riders, etc., and it's not suitable. The last development or change of property on this hill was 35 years ago, and I cannot understand why we are being asked to consider another property. If indeed the committee think it's sensible, then I would respectfully suggest that it should follow its own guidance last time and have a chalet bungalow, which this is not. That might be more amenable to the people that have to live next door and will have effectively all of their light blocked out on their property, despite the fact that the new proposal does not have windows overlooking their house, as was previously the case. There's significant deficiencies in the proposal. None of the committee's objections have been addressed, in my opinion, and I would respectfully suggest that it actually be refused.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Poland? No? Thank you very much. If you can wipe down as well. I'm going to bring Lisa in before we go to questions to officers.
Thank you, Chair. So it's just a reminder to members that clearly there is an extant permission in principle for a dwelling on this site, and that is a significant material consideration which members should bear in mind when considering this application.
Thank you. Questions to officers? No. Thank you. In that case, debate. Right. Okay. Thanks for that. Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. We don't have to get some curveballs, don't we? This is really hard. There are arguments that are solidly, as Councillor Poland quite rightly says, I think, this is not the ideal development in the way it's been described by the applicant or the agent. But nonetheless, the applicant and the agent have made an attempt to mitigate their development. And it's one of those balancing acts, isn't it, between have they actually gone far enough to warrant an approval to overcome the objections. Councillor Poland quite rightly argues haven't been. At the moment, my judgment based upon the report in front of us is that they have gone far enough to satisfy the policy requirements on the local plan, setting aside the 5-year housing land supply arguments, and that's the point. They have attempted to mitigate, they've made some progress, it may not be all the way there, but set against the policy tests, when you read the report, I can't find something that would justify the argument that was being held last time round, which was, I think, quite powerful and quite strong. So at the moment, I am minded to say I can't find a reason to refuse the application despite the arguments being made. And I respect the arguments being made, but I can't find a reason that would stand up to an appeal.
No, it wasn't. Anybody else? Councillor Godison.
Thank you, Chair. I think the planning officer has very correctly reminded us that there is an existing approval for a building on this particular plot. I think there are many reasons why this is not a suitable plot, in my view, for a domestic building, but there is a extant permission for a building. I think Councillor Poland made a very sensible suggestion that that a single-storey bungalow would possibly be a better solution in this particular in this particular case, because it really isn't a terribly good site. It's got a flooding situation at the bottom, so it's a cul-de-sac road going down, public footpath, cycle plan, no turning. There are lots of reasons why this is not a good site for a residential property, but we are stuck with an extant permission already granted, so that's not an issue. But I would like to suggest that the committee might consider that this is not this particular application should not be approved, and the applicant should be indicated to the applicant that if he were to go back and come forward with a bungalow, that would possibly be more favourably received. Thank you.
Councillor Godison, were you moving for refusal there?
I am. If the committee, if somebody else is willing to second that, then and there are indications that the committee might go down that route, then I would be willing to recommend approval, refusal. Thank you.
We need your reasons for refusal. Greg.
Can I just, if I draw members' attention to page 94, the very top of page 94, members have previously considered a technical details consent application. So following the approval of the PIP, there was a technical details consent application that was refused by this committee. The single reason for refusal of that was in respect of the massing and bulk and the impact upon the neighbouring residential property. There was no reason for refusal in respect to the impact on the wider character and appearance of the area. The proposal is a lesser proposal now in terms of the two-storey rear extension has been, rear extension is not existing, but the rear projection has been reduced to a single-storey rear projection, and the dimensions of that are on the fourth paragraph on page 94, just above the title, Principle of Development. It talks about that's the difference between the current proposal and the previous proposal. So obviously the officer's view is that that is sufficient to address the previous reason for refusal that was put forward, but the point is that there was only one reason for refusal put forward previously, and in terms of consistency of decision making, the introduction of additional reasons for refusal wouldn't be safe decision making, and therefore I suggested what members need to consider is whether that reason for refusal has been addressed by virtue of the changes that are now proposed. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Godison, your reasons for refusal. As I understand it, Greg's saying the only reason you can have is scale, bulk and massing. Put your microphone on, please. Can you put your microphone on, please?
Sorry, I'll repeat that again. Reason number 2 for approval, the proposed development would be an appropriate design. I think this particular application is not an appropriate design for this particular spot. And reason number 3, the development would not result in undue loss of privacy or cause undue overlooking and overshadowing. I think as far as Chalon is concerned, it does very much cause undue loss of privacy and undue overlooking and overshadowing. So I think reason number 3 doesn't stand up either for approval. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Freeman and then myself.
I'm happy to second the motion for refusal. I think there are a few issues with this, and really it does need to be looked at again. It's just too big for the place. Really, a bungalow would be much more suitable for the site.
Thank you. I think, if I remember rightly, it was me that suggested that a bungalow would be the ideal for this site. But I look at it from the front, and what I see is a bungalow. And actually the height has been brought down 2 metres. And that is very loosely the height of a second story. It's an odd site because with the fall of the land, the second story is effectively downstairs rather than upstairs from the the entrance level. It's a little bit unusual in that regard. And I think a 2 metre reduction in height, which I say is roughly equal to a story, and the relocation of it, and the fact there's no windows overlooking, I think I will be voting for approval of this site. However, it's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal. Oh, sorry, bring Greg in first.
Yes, Chairman, if we could just clarify what the proposed reasons for refusal are, just given my previous advice in respect of the previous determination of a very similar technical details consent application. The key difference being the height of the 2-storey previously the 2-storey rear projection. We now have a single-storey rear projection. That is the key difference between the schemes. Previously, set out on page 94, members resolved and the council therefore refused the application on a single reason for refusing, being the massing and bulk of the proposed dwelling having an unacceptable impact on the residential amenity of the adjoining properties. Again, I must reiterate that it's my advice that refuse and introduce additional reasons for refusal over and above the previous one would be very likely to result in a risk of costs award against us, given the similarity of the schemes. And I would advise members to consider whether the scheme that's now presented does or does not address the reason for refusal that's page 94, at the top of page 94, and to not consider imposing additional reasons for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Godison, been advised that it would be better if you amended your proposal to just have the one reason for refusal, which would be scale, bulk and massing. Are you content with that? And Councillor Freeman, are you happy with that amendment? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so it's been moved for refusal and seconded for the single reason of scale, bulk and massing. Those in favour of refusal? Make that 2. And those against refusal? 5. In that case, I move for approval as per the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Court, thank you. Been moved and seconded for approval as per the officer's recommendation. Those in favour? 5. And those against? 2. Thank you. And if you could confirm.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that application is approved in accordance with the main agenda paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item number 5, 68 Northfield Road, Sherfield and Loddon. And if Councillor Morgan could come up to the Speaker's chair and wait there whilst the officer introduces it. Thank you.
This is a full planning application for the erection of a part 2-storey, part single-storey rear extension, first floor front extension and conversion of a garage to living accommodation at 68 Northfield Road, Sherfield on Loddon. There is an update. Since the production of the paper, there's been an additional 2 additional letters of objection. One raised a new issue about the boundary measurements. There's the officer comment and response in there. There's an additional 2 conditions proposed, one relating to the use of the roof of the first floor, of the ground floor extension, and the hard standing to have drainage. The officers also recommend redrafting condition 3 on the main papers, page 130, to make it clear that the roofing material of the existing house and the proposed pitched roof of the extension is as stated on the application forms, which is as existing, and not as could be taken from the plans because of where the number is on the roof in the middle of it, not aluminium, brushed aluminium, which is just the capping of the roof and the capping around the flat roof. It was a little bit of confusion, so we're going by the information on the application form, which states the roof tiles will be as existing and the pitched roof of the extension would have the same roof tiles as the existing roof.
Thank you. If I could just clarify, so the aluminium is just the capping and the roof material is concrete tiles?
The application form, I've got it here, it's very clear. The roof, description of existing materials and finishes, existing concrete tiles, description of proposed materials and finishes, existing concrete tiles retained, single ply membrane to the flat roof. Obviously that wouldn't have tiles. And the confusion arose because when you look at the numbering on the plans and then the notes down the side, it says roof capping, powder coated aluminium colour dark grey, but the actual number 6 is in the middle of the roof, not near the capping or at the eaves or anything. So we just thought that would be clarify that point, that notwithstanding what could be interpreted from the plans, we're going on the application form, so the condition would be redrafted to make that clear on that material.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morgan, you have 4 minutes, and I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Committee. Firstly, I'd like to say how poorly this revision to the original application has been received. No notification of the revised plans were forwarded to the PC or the relevant neighbours, and we were only notified of this when the agenda for this meeting was publicised. After consultation with all council members, the parish council is still opposed to this application, as it does not comply with the requirements of our neighbourhood plan or with the Basingstoke and Deans local plan. Basingstoke and Deans local plan policy EM10 clause 1C states that development should positively contribute to the appearance and use of streets and other public places. Clause 2C have due regard to the density, scale, layout, appearance, architectural detailing, materials and history of the surrounding area and relationship to neighbouring buildings.
and Clause 2E provide appropriate parking provision in accordance with the adopted parking standards. Sherford-on-Loddon Neighbourhood Plan Policy D1, development proposals must show how they would preserve, conserve or enhance the character area with regards to Clause C, the materials used in the development, and Policy D2, in order to reflect the rural character of existing dwellings, development should, wherever possible, Clause C, use clay-based products in red or brown hues with a limited use of interspersed white paint on brick or wood. And Clause M provides sufficient car parking and integrate it within landscaping so that it does not dominate or cause congestion in the streets. The current revised plans do not comply with these requirements as they are proposing to roof the front and rear extensions with dark grey aluminium. Now that's the first I've heard about it tonight, that it's only the cappings, because it is certainly not clear from the drawings and the notes. The addition of the pitch roof at the front of the building exacerbates the intrusive nature of this extension, and the rear flat-roofed extension is not in keeping with surrounding houses. The use of dark grey roofing, cappings and window and door frames will make the building look like an industrial unit in the middle of a residential estate. Added to which the proposed use of timber to clad the front of the house and the first floor rear extension does not comply with local policies. By converting the garage into living accommodation, the capacity for off-road parking is compromised. And as the building is on a bend, any subsequent parking that intrudes onto the pavement or road will constitute a hazard to other residents and traffic. We consider this application to be an overdevelopment of the site and totally inappropriate with regards to the current standard of adjacent houses and is aesthetically altering the street scene of this residential community. So the Parish Council are opposed to these revised plans and would request that they are refused.
Thank you. If you could turn your microphone off, please. Questions for Councillor Morgan? No. Thank you, Councillor Morgan. If you could have a wipe down. And if we could have Barry Poffley to the Speaker's chair, please, if he's here. No, would appear not. In which case, Gavin Watts. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good afternoon all. My name is Gavin Watts, founder of the architecture practice, acting on behalf of Mr and Mrs Dent at 68 Northfield Road. Obviously just want to speak on behalf of the client today and obviously just kind of reiterate why we see this scheme fit for approval. Since the application has been lodged, we've worked closely with the local planning authority to address some concerns that were raised during this time. But yeah, I'd just like to use this time just to speak about some of the design intent and then how we've responded to some of the comments raised. The project, obviously, the intent of the project really is to bring the existing property up to a contemporary standard for a young family and improve the layout of the ground floor to improve the connection to the garage, but then also cater for this kind of current open plan living that has become a big trend these days, and basically bringing an existing property to modern standards. So the majority of the properties within the area have undergone numerous extensions and remodification in the past that you may well be aware of, both single and two-storey. Most notably as well, next door has recently had a single-storey extension above the garage approved. What we tried to do during the time is carefully consider scale and massing of the design and obviously the adjacent buildings as well. Just like to clarify, the proposal does not take the property over the provisional of the overdevelopment on the site, as it's still less than 50% of the overall site. And what I think one of the objections during the application commented that it was going beyond the existing boundary line to the front of the property. I would just like to reiterate that we are sticking to the existing front of the existing garage. Therefore, following similar precedent along the street frontage, in particular the next door property where we're adding a single storey extension above the existing garage. I'd say in terms of the choice of material to the front as well, we've all seen that the street is very eclectic in its appearance. We have white render, we have white PVC weatherboarding, concrete tile, slate tiling, brick extensions. What this project is looking to do is basically enhance the existing building itself by replacing the existing weatherboarding with a contemporary natural material and just improve the kind of sustainability of this project as well. In terms of the parking, we've worked closely with Curtis, who is our planning officer on the project, and working with him during the project, we have addressed the concerns of the provisions on the site, and we are confident, and like I said, Curtis has also signed that off, saying that he is happy with the compliance of the parking provisions on site. It's also important to note that
you have 1 minute.
At the beginning of the project, we went for a flat roof to the front of the property. When concerns were raised during the application, we did amend that to a pitched roof in keeping with surrounding properties. Finally, I think from the rear of the property, obviously it has minimal impact from the streetscape. However, we saw a flat roof scheme on the first floor more appropriate on the back due to trying to reduce the amount of vertical volume on site. Especially with the proximity of number 67 next to the property. This has allowed us to basically reduce the scale of the overall development whilst improving the living standards on first floor for the master bedroom, as well as providing better accommodation throughout the property. We've kept brick predominantly throughout the ground floor, all the way through the ground floor, in keeping with the local character. And you can clearly see that the property itself has kind of a three-part split on the appearance of it. So we are maintaining
if you could wind up, please,
across the scheme. So in conclusion, really, we have worked very hard with the local planning authority to bring this home into much needed contemporary renovation for this young family. So thank you.
Thank you. If you turn your microphone off, please. Questions for the speaker? I have one. You said a minute ago that you'd kept the rear extension flat roof to reduce the bulk of it, yet on the front you've done exactly the opposite. You've put a gable and a pitch roof on, which increases the bulk. Can you explain the logic of applying one criteria at one side of the building and the other criteria in a more prominent position at the front of the building?
So at the during the application process, obviously it was at the request that we re-review the front elevation due to its proximity on the streetscape, and basically review that is no longer a flat roof object, but more so a pitched roof. We did feel that a flat roof at the time was more appropriate, again keeping the scale down, but just in response to the local comments raised, and at the advice of our planning officer, we deemed that it would be suitable to address those concerns and comply with or adhere to the objections raised.
Thank you. Any more questions? No. Thank you very much. If you can wipe down before you move. Right, questions to officers? No. Debate? Okay, I'll start it off. If you look at page 133, you can see the plans, or the site plan, and you can see, I'm looking at how much this forward of number 67, this house is. It's 50% of this house is forward of its next door neighbour. Now, some of that at the moment is single storey, but that will all become 2-storey, and somewhere in the region of 1.5 metres from the boundary. I am concerned that that forward extension is going to block a huge amount of light from the neighbouring property. I'd like to hear what other people think. Thank you. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, bearing in mind what you've just said, it does rather protrude towards the road, and the picture of the cars, it does seem to be very tight in terms of parking. I've had recent battles in my ward where people have erected gates, thus leaving any access quite dangerous, because if the gates are shut, anyone turning into the drive is then stuck with its backside out into the road. So I'm not quite sure how to interpret that, but coming so completely out and up does seem to make it rather cramped in that area.
And Councillor Harvey.
I don't think there's an argument necessarily around the existing property already being so significantly forward of the other. But there is a real argument that's being made, I think, about the scale and massing of the extension as set against the neighbouring property as what it's going to be. And I think there's an argument to say it's a shame, really, isn't it, that the architect chose to change from the flat roof to the pitch roof when the flat roof might have actually been more acceptable in the context of the conversation we're having. They've chosen to do that, and that's what I'm faced with the application we've got in front of us. I do think there's an argument about the scale of that set against the neighbouring property, and that is a concern I would share with you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I think, in a way, the applicant's caught between a rock and a hard place on this one. Because if you make this flat roof, it's totally out of keeping with the street scene. If you make it a pitch roof, it increases the bulk and particularly the overshadowing effect on 67, or whatever the number is, on the next door neighbour. So it is a difficult one. The existing building line doesn't change at the ground floor, but it does come out another 1.5 metres on the first floor, and again 1 metre, probably more than that if you take the slope of the roof. So it does have a huge impact on that neighbour. So, you know, we've got nobody else feeling inclined to speak, so I am going to move for refusal on the grounds of scale, bulk, massing and overshadowing of the neighbours of number 67. So I've moved for refusal, and do I have a seconder? Councillor Harvey seconded it. Anybody else want to speak? In that case, it's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? That's everybody. Thank you. Officer, to confirm.
Just to say that the recommendation is to refuse the application based on the scale, bulk, massing, overshadowing of the development on number 67. Can I just clarify, is that just the front extension or the rear extension as well?
I think we'll...
I think based on the listening to what members were discussing, my interpretation and understanding is that your concerns were in relation to the front extension.
Yeah, it's the front extension. Back one, I don't think is too much of a problem because of the position.
Okay. So it relates to the front
front extension,
front first floor projection,
yeah.
And that's in relation to policy EM10 on the high quality design that's required.
Thank you. So that has been refused. Right, last item on the agenda, because we have already dealt with application number 6, is agenda item number 6. Greg, I think you're introducing that.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is a proposal that seeks approval to vary a legal agreement that has been secured in respect of 83 dwellings at Blosswood Lane, Whitchurch. The variation to the legal agreement that is sought is to change the phase 1 legal agreement from management company, no, from the public open space being transferred to the council, which is variation of legal agreement currently secures, to a management company. And that is what phase 2, which was a separate application, has already secured through that legal agreement. So it's to ensure consistency across the development. Thank you, Chairman.
There are no speakers, so questions to officers? No. Debate? No. In that case, I will move it from the chair in favour of the officer recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Court, thank you. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? And I'll make that 6. And I take it 1 against. Thank you. That's it. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Oh, sorry, please confirm.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that the variation to the legal agreement is approved. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to the officers, and hopefully I will see everybody on a Maunday Thursday for a viewing panel of a solar farm, or not. Thank you.